Welcome to the virtual Fictitious International Convention 2021. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to thank you so much for your participation and contribution to our annual convention's success. We are Long Ming and Minh Ngọc Nguyen as the presentations moderators. We are happy to see all of you here, especially in this workshop. And we do hope that all of you will be able to leave the presentation, the workshop with valuable takeaways. We are happy to welcome Professor Rob Waring in this 60-minute workshops entitled The Fundamentals of Vocabulary Instruction. Dr. Rob Waring is a professor at Notre Seishin University in Okayama, Japan. He is a knowledge expert in extensive reading and vocabulary acquisition. He has published over 80 articles and has given hundreds of lectures, plenaries, and feature speakers presentations in 32 countries. Please welcome Professor Rob Waring.
Thank you very, very much for that lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. Some of you may have seen me this morning at the keynote speech. I will be giving another talk tomorrow morning, the same time as my keynote speech this morning. And that will be on extensive reading, how to do it with no money and few resources. I won't be talking too much about extensive reading now, just I may go over some of the points from this morning. If you didn't watch, I'll just review them. But please feel free to go back and watch the video when it becomes available. So we're going to start. Oh, you may see me moving my eyes from one screen to the other. I have two screens going here. This one has my sort of overview, and this is the actual slides as well. So apologies if you see me doing this. I'm not ignoring you. Okay, so let's move on. So let's look then at some of the key things for vocabulary learning. What do we know about vocabulary learning? Well, if you look at the research for vocabulary and you see how people are being taught, what are the sort of teachers' beliefs and so on. Well, these are some of the things that we find, not only from my experience, from research of reading strategists like Oxford and various other people. What we do know is most vocabulary teaching is from context, maybe from a reading material or a listening passage. There tends to be random selection of materials. And this morning I showed this image that showed the structure of a course book. And typically what we do is we structure course books very often by some kind of theme. So unit 1 has a theme, unit 2 has a different theme, 3 has a different theme, 4 has a different theme, and so on and so on. So they tend to be very thematic based, or they tend to be topic based. Sometimes they are grammatically based, where they teach, for example, be verb first and present simple and present continuous and so on. But generally speaking, the words are connected to whatever the topic or the theme of the unit would be. This means that there's going to be gaps, huge gaps in the vocabulary that students meet. There tends to be different vocabulary in each topic, in each unit. This is something I mentioned this morning, something I called one-hit learning. There are often too many words at once. Some of these books may have 50, 60, 70 words in a unit, which might be, something you do in a week. And that's sometimes too much for the students to do. We often find that some rare words are often favored over common words, and we'll look at some examples of this later. There also tends to be a focus on single words in like book and apple, table, cup, rather than multi-words units like, for example, pencil case or traffic jam and so on. We tend to find also, because students are using a textbook, they all learn the same words, whether they need them all or not. All students have different interests, but we do know that all students will be meeting the same words because they've got the same course book. One of the most important things to understand is that for most people, when they teach vocabulary, their sort of approach, their theory of teaching vocabulary would be, if I teach the word, I teach the spelling and the definition or pronunciation. And that's where learning stops. Very often the teaching will stop at, here's the meaning, this is how you pronounce it, this is how you write it, stop, now use it. And we often find that the teachers give meanings. And when I say teachers here, I also mean the book. We tend to find this low recycling of vocabulary in course books. This is something I mentioned this morning. Vocabulary tends not to come back again and again. There tend to be individual units, have one topic, then different topic, then a different topic. Teachers also tend to leave vocabulary learning to learners. They would say something like, you know, here's 20 words, here's 50 words, go and learn them by tomorrow, you're going to have a test, right? But we don't teach them how to learn words effectively and efficiently. We don't teach the learning strategies or the techniques. We just seem to assume they're born being good language learners and good vocabulary learners. Also, as teachers, we rarely set learning goals. We don't sort of say, this semester, they will meet 300 words, they will retain memory of 100 of them. We don't set these types of goals. Or the things like they will meet 10,000 words in their reading. Very rarely are students taught dictionary skills. Every year, I always ask my first year students, has anybody taught you how to use a dictionary? Many people put their hands up and, and say, yeah, once when I was 13. Right, but a dictionary is by far the most important book they're going to know, and they need to learn how to use a dictionary well. And we do find from research that poor understanding of your dictionary, what's in there, leads to students misselecting the wrong meanings and misunderstanding. We tend to also not spend time teaching students how to use vocabulary notebooks effectively. I'm not going to be talking about that right now, but Norbert Schmidt did write a very good article some 15, 20 years ago, which you can find on the internet, that looked at how to take notes for vocabulary in vocabulary notebooks. We often keep words in lists, and there are advantages and disadvantages of this. We tend to find also that the vast majority of vocabulary exercises that appear in course books tend to be tests rather than actually teach. And the last thing is that the teachers often leave the course book to deal with the vocabulary. They just assume, oh, somebody smart in Cambridge University, somebody smart in Pearson has made this book, therefore my vocabulary is covered, therefore I'm fine, I only need to do the book. And we have a fundamental problem there, as I mentioned, because there's lots of words that are missing. So let's just look at a few main principles for vocabulary. The session is called The Fundamentals of Vocabulary Instruction. So let's look at a few key points. I mentioned this morning that there's a lot to learn. 2,000 core words that everybody needs, a general service vocabulary, we call it. 4,000 words to become lower advanced, 9,000 to read native text like a dictionary or like a newspaper without a dictionary. Native level people like myself know between 20 to 30,000 word families. But there's many, many types of vocabulary. So we talk about the individual words like book, table, life, and so on. We also have the derived forms, as you know, unused, user, usefulness, user-friendly, multi-part words, lexical phrases, idioms, and sentence heads. These are just some examples of the types of vocabulary. And I'm not going to go over this. You already know this. But I'm just refreshing this for the points I'm going to be making in the future. Now, these types of things usually are standalone items that you can look at and you can actually intentionally learn it. Pardon me. So you can memorize these things. You can put them in an app, you can put them in a word cards, in a word list, and you can intentionally learn these words. However, things like collocations and collocations take a lot more time. And we're going to talk about collocations and collocations a little bit later, but they need a very different approach. These don't need your direct attention so much. They need to be picked up from context. And I'll come back to talk about that in a few minutes. But one of the problems we have is actually defining what a word is. And this is important because if you're setting goals as a school or as a teacher, and you want to say, I'm going to teach my students 300 words this semester. What do you mean? So this is a word, use. So are users, used, and using the same word or a different word? What about users? Now this is different. It's a different inflection. Now it's a noun, not a verb. Some people would say it's a different word. Other people say, no, it's the same word because it has the same root meaning. What about at use? Is that different from to use? What about the derived forms, misused, unusable, disusability, utility? Are they new words or are they the same word? What about words like pencil case and traffic light? Do we count them as a new word or do we count them as two words? Pencil and case. If you know the word pencil and you know the word case, do you know the word pencil case? What about multi-word units like the day after tomorrow or as soon as? Do they count as one word or four words? What about idioms like let the cat out of the bag? What about phrasal verbs? Are they new words? Are they single words or not? And even things like the numbers and proper nouns, do we count them as words? Now, I'm not going to tell you what I think, but one way that we can categorize them is to see them in terms of families, lemmas, and flemmas. So if we have just the verb form of the word use, but we have the inflections as well, used, uses, using, using, then we have this we call a lemma. That's the family of group of words that we call a lemma. If we also include, say, the noun form, which has the same spelling, we would call that a phlegma. And if we include the derived forms as well in the whole thing, we would call that a family. Now, some of you will have heard of the name Paul Nation, and he often talks about vocabulary, and particularly he talks in terms of families. And this is important. Now, when we're constructing courses and we're building materials for students, do we assume that our base is family or lemma? That's important because can we assume that if we teach the word use, if we take the word use and we think of it in terms of family, this assumes that because we teach use, we also have taught all of these. Therefore, they know all of these, which of course for beginning level students is not correct. A student in their 6th or 7th week of class come across the word use, there's no way they know what misused or disused means. An advanced learner maybe. So for advanced learners, we can define word maybe as families because they've learned how to derive words. They've learned how to inflect words. So this definition is going to change a lot depending on whether we're talking about beginners or whether we're talking about advanced learners. The next important thing to understand is there are 2 stages of vocabulary learning. This leads to a lot of confusion. This distinction is really, really critical because when we're talking about learning vocabulary, we need to understand there are 2 stages. The first is the form-meaning relationship. That is, we see a word like the word apple, we know how to pronounce it, and we know its translation, and we know it refers to this thing. So this is where we match the sound and the spelling to a meaning. Very often, as I said before, vocabulary learning stops here. However, the really important point is all this other stuff, the deeper aspect of vocabulary learning. Now, you need this in order to use it. The form-meaning relationship is fine for reception, but it's not necessarily enough for production. So students need to know the multiple meaning senses or nuances of the word, like an apple or apple of my eye, or the big apple refers to New York. Is it a frequent word? Is it a useful word? Do I spend time on this word or not? How do I use it in context? Is it a scientific word, a medical word, a technology word? What are some of the limits on the use of this word? When can I use it? When can I not use this word? Is this a polite word or casual or rude? Do we typically use it for speaking or writing? Now, as you know, there's lots of words we typically use in writing that we don't use in speaking. We tend to say, I got a letter. We don't say, I received a letter. We also need to make sure students can find the words quickly. We need to build lexical access speed, fluency, automaticity, and their awareness of how the words fit together, collocation and colligation, which I'll talk about in a moment. So Paul Nation developed this table that says we need to think of vocabulary learning in terms of form, meaning, and use in these various parts. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of these things. The slides will be available to you at the end, but do think about this table when you're thinking about, did I teach the word or did I not teach the word? Are you giving activities to the student that means that they can do these things? Do they know what patterns the word can appear in? If they don't know, then learning is incomplete. If they know what's included in the concept or not included in the concept, if they don't know, then again, learning is incomplete. And what are we going to do to make sure that they know all of this about each word? Now, there are also thousands of collocations, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea of co-location, locate together. Now, of course, there are these ones we typically say, and these ones we tend not to say. Beautiful girl, but we don't say handsome girl. Now, if you say, oh, my girlfriend is very handsome, I know what you mean, but it just doesn't sound right. And getting control over collocation is critical for production. We need to make sure that students can say the right thing. If you say, oh, my handsome girl has yellow hair, she ate some weak cheese, it was a large surprise to me. Sounds very strange, right? So we need to make sure students can meet these collocations. But how many collocations are there? So if I was to ask you to think about a simple word, idea, how many different collocations can you think of for the word idea? Good idea, have an idea, bad idea, great idea. Take a moment or two. How many can you think of? How many collocations of this word idea do you think there are? Just think for a moment. You don't have to type in the chat window, just think. How many do you think there are? 10, 5, 20? Abandon an idea, absorb an idea, accept an idea, adjust to an idea, advocate an idea, amplify an idea, and so on, and so on, and so on. Those are the verbs. These are the adjectives. So for a simple word like idea, if you want to use this word well, you're going to need to know the difference, the nuance, the difference in meaning of how this works. Now, I know the difference between a bizarre idea and a far-fetched idea, a diabolical idea and a remarkable idea, a disconcerting idea and a provocative idea. I know this difference. I'm a native speaker. I should know the difference. I would be surprised if many very advanced non-native speakers know 10 of these, 20 of these. And that's the critical difference between being native and non-native. Now, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you have to learn all of these. That's a lifelong task. But the point is, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of different combinations we need to learn. We cannot teach these individually. There's just too many of them. It would take you a week of lessons to explain just these collocations with the word idea. We need a different strategy. We also find that some collocations are easy to teach, what we call the transparent weak collocations, beautiful flower, look out of a window. Don't bother teaching them. They will pick them up. Specialized collocations like Insolvency Act, habeas corpus, only teach them if we need them. Infrequent collocations, don't bother with them. Rancid butter, glimmer of hope, circle of friends, by and large, too rare. Don't spend your time on them. But the ones that do need attention are the ones that are high frequent collocations, like do and make. For example, make your bed, do the laundry, and where there's false friends. So for example, where I live in Japan, the Japanese people would say, in translation, they would say weak tea and they would say thin tea. Kotoga usui, they would say. Where they say thin tea in Japanese, but in English we say weak tea. This is a false friend. These false friends definitely need attention. The difference between meet friends and play with friends. One of my students the other day, I asked her what she did for the weekend. She said, oh, I played with my boyfriend, which has a very different meaning. Thank you, I don't want to know. Right? So that's a miscollocation. So these are the things we need to focus on. So what that means is that most multi-word units aren't worth teaching individually. The collocations, the two parts of the word, will always end up being more frequent than the words that make them up. So if you look at the the British National Corpus of 100 million words, the word strong, very useful word, occurs 213 times every million words. Great word. Let's make sure we teach it. The word wind occurs 73 times. Not so useful, but yes, it's going to appear once every week or 2 weeks. The collocation strong wind occurs only 3 times. It's not worth your time. But another word, compromise, occurs 10 times more frequently. And we should be focusing on this one rather than this one. What this means is most collocations are not worth teaching. They're not worth class time. They have to pick them up from their reading, from exposure. So the other thing that students need, of course, is multi-word units. Here are some examples. Collocations. Now, what's the difference between collocation and colligation? The hint here is the G. So colligation refers to the grammar of the word. We give something to someone. We don't give something at someone, give something for someone. We depend on, not depend in, not depend at someone. So this is what we call colligation, how word grammar fits for each word. And we need to make sure that when we teach words, we teach the full phrase. Don't just teach give to, give someone something. And I'll come back to that later. We need to also make sure they get phrasal verbs, idioms, and expressions like that as well. Now, grammar, we have to be careful with grammar. My feeling is we teach way too much grammar, way too much grammar. In fact, quite a lot of grammar isn't grammar. Quite a lot of grammar is actually lexis, or between vocabulary and grammar. And we have to make sure, as I say, that we teach the full form. So if we have a simple sentence like the word give, the verb give will dominate and can control the sentence. The grammar emerges usually from the main verb. Why? Because the word give has to have some kind of subject that can give something. A smartphone can't give you a kiss, right? So it must be something that you can give, and it must be to a person that can receive it. So she gave a birthday present to her boyfriend, but we cannot say happiness gave a walk to a fish, right? So the point is, the verb itself controls the properties of the verb give. Tell us there's a certain type of subject that can do this. There's a certain type of thing that can be given. It's the property of the word itself that controls the grammar for the sentence. Similarly here, we'd say give someone something, but give something to someone. That's this colligation again. She gave her boyfriend a birthday present, but we cannot say happiness gave the fish a walk, right? So grammar is an emergent system, and I would spend a lot more time working on vocabulary than I would on grammar. So this morning I mentioned briefly about how long it's going to take to learn these words. Well, we know that 30 to 50 meetings for a word to be picked up from incidental learning, from say reading. This is what research suggests, more for productive use. From intentional learning through word card apps or flashcards, 10 to 15 meetings. But to learn the collocations and deeper aspects of vocabulary is going to take much, much, much longer because they're individually infrequent. But sadly, we know nothing at all, nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing about how long it takes to pick up a grammatical form. Zero. We have no idea if the past simple tense takes 200 meetings, 2,000 meetings, 20,000 meetings. No idea at all. But very often we construct our courses based on the idea we know how long these things take to learn. And it's a real shame. It's a massive hole in our industry that we do not know how long it takes. And this is critically important because we need to know how long it takes. So we need to know how much text we need to give to our students. So let's just look at a frequency for a moment. And as you know, frequency is critically important factor. Students need to learn the most frequent words before the less frequent words. So here's some words for you. Which of these words would you teach? Imagine these words appeared in your course book tomorrow. Which of these would you teach? Which would you spend time on? Which would you not spend time on? Just cast your eye amongst that. Again, you don't need to type, just in your own mind, which is worth time, your time, students' time. How about at random or by and large or a good deal? Yeah, maybe not fait accompli, maybe not this one. But let's look at what the data say. Out of is the 177th most frequent lexical item in English. Not just phrase, most frequent lexical item in English, full stop. So you can see down here, this is the 9,000th most frequent lexical item, right? This occurs 490 times per million words. This occurs 58 times per million words. Look at these ones. Are you surprised? Grown up, old fashioned, only 3 times every million words. By and large, 5 times every million words. If we stop at 20, these ones maybe we could say are worth teaching time. These ones don't need teaching time. What's the problem here? My guess is you've chosen some of these. We know from research that we're very good at identifying the really high frequency ones. Teachers are very good at identifying the low frequency ones. Research suggests we are terrible at guessing the middle. Terrible at guessing the middle. It's totally random selection. So I would definitely point yourself towards some sort of a word list that gives you some frequencies. When you're choosing words to teach, make sure you teach the high frequency useful words first. So if we look at the frequency in a bit more detail, we know the word the is the most common word in English. The word the is 5.6% of the entire number of words you will meet in any book. So what this means is, if you meet the word the, if you now read 18 more words, the word the will come again. 18 more words, the will come again. 18 more words, the will come again. So after 178 words, you're going to meet the 10 times. After 356 words, you're going to meet the 20 times. Now, as I said before, if we assume that it takes between 15 to 20 meetings to master a word, how many words do you need to meet in order to master a certain number of vocabulary? So if we look at the 10th most frequent word in English, it occurs once every 64 words. To meet it 20 times, you need to read 1,274 words. What about 5,000 words? If you want to meet all of these 5,000 words one time, you're going to have to read 137,000. That's 2 native books. After 2 native books, you will have met all of these words at least once, some of them many times. But to meet this word perpetual 20 times, you need to read 2.7 million words. If you want to get to a native level or near native level, you want to be able to read without a dictionary, you're going to have to meet about 13 million words. That's what vocabulary tells us. This is the mathematics of vocabulary, and you cannot get around it because of something called Zipf's law. Okay, this 13 million words is about 200 native texts. And we have to spend our time doing this. We have no choice. There is no quick route here. If you're interested in word lists, this project here is very useful. It's got general service lists, TOEIC lists, academic lists, lists for children, and so on. And I will point you to go and have a look at some of these words here that that you might need for your students. And this is the Zipf's law that I mentioned before. As I said before, that we have high frequency words like the and low frequency words down this way. So this makes up 6% of any text. So 25 words covers 25 different words, including like of, in, the, and, be, is, will cover 50% of volume of any text. 1,000 different words will cover 80% of any text. Those same words will come again and again and again and again. And 3,000 words covers 85 to 90%. However, in any text, 40% of words only occur 1 or 2 times. And this is critically important to understand because it means that most words, or 40% of the words, will not be learnt because they will not be met enough times. And this impacts on the type of materials we should give our students. So this table I showed you this morning that showed if the students only learn from a course book, they're going to learn about 900 words. If they do course book and read 2 graded reader storybooks, they're going to now they will now learn about 2,000 words. So here, in this one, in this course book, of these 3,000 words, 500 words were met more than 50 times. 210 words were met between 30 to 49 times. These words are probably known. These words are probably not known because they're only met 1 to 4 times. Again, 40% of the words will not be learned. But if we add reading, you can see the difference here. This vocabulary and this vocabulary, it more than doubles your vocabulary by doing lots and lots and lots of extensive reading. And this morning, I also presented the fact that we need to make sure that the learning is systematized. So these graded reader books here will only practice this vocabulary and grammar. And you get strong at reading this. You read many, many books at this level to consolidate and strengthen your knowledge. Then you move to level 2, which has this vocabulary and this grammar. This vocabulary and this grammar is not there. And this will be there, but also will include the old one. Level 3 books will again build on previous knowledge. So graded readers are critically important for understanding and developing knowledge in scaffolded, non-random ways. Now, unfortunately, many people believe that the best books to give students would be native materials, books written for native children or books written for native speakers. Be very, very, very careful of these books. Very, very careful of these books. If your students are near native level, fine. If the students are right at the very, 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 very early stages in learning, those books have very few words and maybe they're okay. But if you look at the data, from some of these books, yeah, you will see that actually these books are not necessarily very useful. So if you look, for example, at the book Frankenstein, look at the vocabulary in there. For the graded reader book, which has the controlled vocabulary and controlled grammar, lots and lots of words, this is the red one, many words are getting repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated. In the native book, there's a huge number of rare words, which will just be forgotten. This native book is clearly not suitable for most Vietnamese learners. Now, native materials are very interesting because there's lots of them. They're very high interest, they're engaging, they've got great pictures in them, but these books are not leveled in any way that our field of English language teaching understands. There's no CEFA level, there's no beginner, no intermediate, no advanced. We have to be very, very careful. Also note that these books are standalone. Book A is not connected to Book B in any way. Book B is not connected to Book C in any way. There's no recycling of vocabulary. It's random. Each book is random vocabulary. So be very careful. We also have an assumption here. Native level books are written for natives. When you start reading in your first language at age 3, 4, 5, you already know thousands of words. You already know most of the important grammar. That's not the same for ELT. When you start learning a foreign language, you don't know the grammar. You don't know the vocabulary. These books are not suitable, right? When you start reading in a first language, you already know the grammar and vocabulary. So you're just adding a spelling to a sound you already know. The task is so much easier. You've already got the grammar to work with, but you don't have the vocabulary for ELT. Be very, very careful about using native materials for foreign language learning. So how should we teach vocabulary? What are some of the things we should have a look at? Well, of course, perform a needs analysis. Who are your students? What do they need? What's their ambitions? What are they interested in? What's their goals? How much can you push them? How busy are they? How much homework can you give them without breaking them? And so on, yeah? So we have to teach something that they're going to meet again soon. High frequency, high utility, very, very useful words. Please spend some time looking at word frequency lists so you're familiar with which words are useful. Make sure you teach words that are found in a wide range of texts, not specialist words, for example, that just only medical words like thermometer or stethoscope, useless for most people, unless you're going to be a medical student. Make sure you cover words with a wide meaning. So we teach the word go before we teach the word saunter. To saunter is to walk in a certain way, right? Go has many, many other words underneath it. Go could include move, travel, and so on. Go is the most important verb that covers the other verbs. Teach the top meaning verb first. Teach words are going to be easy to learn. Loan words, for example, I know Vietnamese will borrow some words from English. Japanese borrows about 20,000 words from English. Teach them first. The kids already know them before they get to school. If there's any loan words or borrowed words that you have in English that you also have in Vietnamese, teach them first, because that's an instant vocabulary. Teach culture-specific vocabulary. So in Japan, you need to teach the word temple because there's temples here. If you're teaching you're teaching English in Italy, we don't teach temple, we'll teach cathedral. So culture-specific vocabulary so they can talk about their daily life. Make sure you teach classroom vocabulary, teach instructions, and teach the base meaning of a word first. So Nation and Webb came up with something called the technique feature analysis. And this morning, Lynn Tran talked about this. She talked about how you can assess vocabulary activities. How can you assess whether a vocabulary activity is working or not? And this is an analysis that Webb and Nation did on flashcards. So these are the kind of questions that you need to ask yourself. As you're designing or using a vocabulary activity, make sure that you're asking these questions. Is it a good activity? Does it have a clear goal? Will it actively motivate learners? Do learners select the target words or not? Or are they given them? And so on and so on. So this is a list, a kind of checklist that they've got. There's actually 2 pages of it, and this is the second page here. It's a very, very useful way to look at this. And if you search for Webb and Nation technique feature analysis, you can read an academic article about this. But assess your vocabulary activities using this type of thing. So let's just look at a few typical vocabulary activities. Can you see what's wrong with this type of exercise? Match the opposites. What's wrong with this? It's a very standard, very typical vocabulary activity. What's the opposite? Well, the obvious answer is that we should be saying, oh, cold is the opposite of hot. Dark is the opposite of light. Really? Is something cold because it's not hot? Right? Just because something is not hot doesn't make it cold. This water is not cold, right? It's not hot, it's in the middle, right? If something is light, doesn't mean that something else is dark. Do you mean light suitcase, dark suitcase? Light versus heavy? And also, the problem with this type of activity is actually inducing, it's actually potentially creating future error. So if we teach that strong is the opposite of weak, we have strong tea, weak tea, the problem is that students will also think that we say weak cheese when we don't. We say mild cheese, not strong cheese. So have to be very, very careful about what we're trying to do with this type of activity. What's wrong with this type of activity? Well, here, some research that again Lynn Tran mentioned this morning is about the way that we teach words in sets. So teaching furniture words or the months or family relationships, what students tend to do is they tend to mix them up. Not only are they learning, but they also have to learn to keep them separate. This is why students often mix up words like Tuesday and Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. Different, difficult, and diffident. Your students will probably mix them up like mine do. I still get confused between mother and father in Japanese because I learned them at the same time. So what we need to do here is to make sure that we teach them separately, but review them together. So we'll teach chair maybe this week, stool maybe the week after, armchair next month, and then later bring them back and teach them as a set. Do it as a revision activity, not as a teaching activity. Again, what's wrong with this exercise? We see this all the time, not so much in textbooks, but I certainly see it in homemade teachers' worksheets, where we have words like regulate, well, notify, and rough. What tends to happen here is that teachers use a verb and they match the meaning with a noun, right? We have rough like sandpaper, right? So we have to be very careful here when we're giving definitions that we use a verb to describe a verb, not a noun to describe a verb. Be careful of that. Similarly here, this type of exercise, we've got the keywords at the top here. John is always telling people how well he plays guitar. He's so, well, the correct answer here would be probably he's so intelligent, but big-headed, right? He could be big-headed. He's boasting, for example. Many girls of 16 and 17 are far too to get married. Now, the correct answer here is supposed to be immature. But a perfectly good suggestion would be too intelligent to get married at that age, right? So be very careful that there's not double answers or misconceptions depending on how you look at it. You see this quite often in course books, even printed course books. You see where it's possible to misunderstand the context depending on the cultural background. Be very careful. Similarly, we see people, teachers and course books and dictionaries writing definitions. So a book with a lot of information about the world, places, and people. What's this? I asked my students, and most people would say, oh, dictionary. But actually, it's almanac. Something you eat with. That could be anything. Fork, people, hands, spoon. It's just not clear enough. Send, deliver, or transport something could be anything of 20 different words. Transmit, transform, transfer, and so on and so on. So these definitions aren't really defining the word carefully. Be very, very careful you don't have lazy definitions like these ones. Okay. This morning, I showed this example of what we call contrived activities, where we make a sentence like the president asked his secretary to make a copy of the letter to put in the files. The grammar's fine. The vocabulary's fine. The problem is nobody in the history of the world would ever say this sentence. It's a contrived sentence that's unnatural, that is EFL speak. It's much more likely to have a sentence like, could you please make a copy of the letter to put in the files? Or instead of the secretary thought that making copies for her boss was not her job, I don't think it's my job to be making copies for the boss, right? Please use natural sentences rather than contrived ones. And again, in this type of activity, she told me to take a few days to consider. Much better, please consider his job offer. Take a few days to consider. Or call the Anne to confirm your reservation. Have you confirmed your reservation? Right? It's a much more natural sentence. So use natural sentences rather than contrived sentences. When we see reading activities, we often see these things. This is a very, very common problem we find. There are so many problems here. I could spend 30 minutes talking about this, but let's just look at a few of them. The first one is that we're choosing really, really rare words. Doc. Does that mean document? Does that mean doctor? Now, doc, it says doctor. Call, abr. What does call mean? Does that mean collocation? Does that mean colloquial? Right? It's unclear. And what about words like ruefully and at loggerheads with? At loggerheads is the 86,000th most frequent word in English. 86,000th. Why are we teaching this? Why is it in the book at all? So the next one I want to show here is when we substitute. So let's look here at number 5. This is 5. It's bad for a dad to see a teenage girl seemingly unable to hit it off with her mother. So let's substitute our definition. It's as bad for dad to see a teenage girl seemingly unable get on well her mother. So we've accidentally mistaught the correct form, to get on well with, right? So again, be careful when you're doing this. Make sure that the vocabulary that you're teaching is highly frequent and useful. Let's look at another example here where we teach from pictures. Can you guess what these words are? Have a quick guess. What's number 1? Maybe you're thinking ship, boat. What about number 3? Or 6? Or 9? Or 11? Any idea what these things are? This is supposed to be teaching you. The theory here is because you can see it, you know what the author intends. Here's the actual answer. Liner. Did you think that number 2 was horizon? Could have been sky, could have been ocean. What about number 6? Was that waves? Did you think 3 was bay? Did you guess that 11 was shingles? I didn't. I'd spend my entire life wondering what that was. I would never think of shingles. So please be careful that just using a picture doesn't necessarily mean that comprehension is there. And we see that with other activities like this. Yeah, these type of activities. Is that an oven or is that a toaster, or what are some of these things? Maybe in Vietnam, you don't have cooking equipment like this. This looks like a British kitchen. It doesn't look like a Vietnamese kitchen, right? So make sure that it's culturally specific, right? Similarly, with activities like this, where you've got the parts of the body and the word has been scrambled. This is a completely useless activity. The students are not learning anything. Why is that? Well, because in order to complete this, they already need to know that DEHA means head. They already know head. They already know eyes. So why are we testing them? We're testing them stuff on what they already know, and it's just a complete and utter waste of time. We also find, so please don't do jumbled words like this when they already know the words. It's just a puzzle and wasting everybody's time. We often find recently that people are using these things here called a concordance. And these come from data analysis through data-driven learning. So the key here, as you can see, the word measures is in the middle. And the idea here is you should be able to see the context. So broader measures, concrete measures, discriminatory measures, draconian measures. And the idea here is you get a feeling for which words collocate with measures. The problem here is that I guess maybe some of you don't know what draconian means. Some of you may not be familiar with consensus. So this has come from native text, but this is used by non-native students. If they don't know some of these words, then they're going to need to look it up in a dictionary, which defeats the entire purpose of this, because they're now working not at the collocation level, they're working at the lexical level. So be very, very careful about using these types of activities. They're very useful if very, very carefully selected. But you can easily spend 20 or 30 minutes on an activity like this when really they can learn a lot more vocabulary from, say, reading a book or doing something else. Okay. So there's a very good book that I would suggest called Implementing the Lexical Approach, which has huge numbers of very, very good vocabulary design ideas. And I'm not going to go over them. Please find the book. It's available online. This is an example of one. So which of these words form strong word partnership with all the words in the line below? Food, meal, white wine, red wine, sandwich, and restaurant. So here you have to choose which word here. We would say, for example, salad. Well, okay. Which word would it be? Red wine salad? No. Food salad? No. Salad sandwich? Yes. Chicken sandwich, cheese sandwich, freshly made sandwich, club sandwich. That fits. So now we're working at the collocational level. What about dry, crisp, fruity? Probably white wine. Now, maybe you don't know all of these, but you were thinking, oh, fruity wine. Oh, wow, I didn't know that. All right. So you can actually learn from this activity. It's not just a test. Okay. Down here, family food, Chinese food, vegetarian food, trendy, elegant food. No, that doesn't work. Restaurant. So here you're matching the collocations. So this type of activity is really, really useful for students. Or something like this, where you're comparing a point, the point, the point, and points. Really helps students to understand what they are doing, okay? So what we need to do now is I just want to spend the last 3 minutes or so looking at the importance of some online materials. So there are many online apps which you can learn vocabulary from intentionally. They're very, very good. They're good for helping promote recognition, sometimes productive practice. They're good for spelling. They're great for spaced repetition, which I mentioned before. It's critically important we have spaced repetition. They can help scaffold learning because they are meeting the words again and again and again. And they often have a learner management system to help with tracking what the students are learning. But almost all of it's controlled practice. So I said before that, when we learn something, we're going to forget. So we need to meet it again soon. We're going to forget again. We need to meet it again soon. And these apps are fantastic at learning words at the first initial form meaning relationship. They will not help you with depth of knowledge. They will not tell you the collocations, but they will really help strengthen that very, very first series of words. So this type of work can be done through apps or also through extensive reading. Meet the words again and again and again. I have about 1 more minute or so, and I just want to introduce to you 2 or 3 apps. Word Learner is one app. Quizlet is a very famous one. Anki is another famous one. Any of these are fine. They will be very good. This is actually my own app. This one you can log in as a teacher. You can track their learning. You can set word lists, set tests and everything. This is much more focused on EFL. This is not so much focused on EFL. But they have a particular theory. The idea here is that students will start here at the beginning. Oh, let me just, come on. Where are we? What's happening? It's frozen for a second. Come on. Why are we not moving? We seem to not be. Okay. So if you learn a word and you get it correct, then it goes to the next box. If you then get it correct again, it goes to the second box. So you wait a week or wait a day or 2, you try again, and it goes to the next box. If you get it wrong, it goes back to the beginning again. So what this is doing is slowly building your knowledge. And over time, you'll meet the word again an hour later, 6 hours later, a day later, 4 days later, a week later, then eventually the word will be learned. So there's actually an increase in spaced repetition. So I strongly advise you to consider using some of these apps. Some of the apps like Word Learner, for example, have many different games. You can create your own word lists for students. You have many different ways that they can learn, and so on. So please take a look at some of these things. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Please put them into the chat window.
Thank you for your insightful workshops, Rob. I have collected one question for you and just share on the screen from one of our participants, Miss Hương Nguyen. So this is her question.
Okay. At what level can students learn new vocabularies, word families? Oh my gosh. Right. That's a PhD question right there. The answer to that's incredibly messy. I'm sorry for taking the second question, but that really jumped out at me. What a wonderful question. I think the answer to that is when the students make the students familiar with how to inflect words, make sure they know how to add the S, add the ing, and they're familiar with, say, the non-regular past forms like, catch and caught. But do the inflections. Now, you're going to need to spend a lot of time working on word parts, the affixes. Spend a lot of time on that early on. There's a paper by Paul Nation that's called Word Families that actually gives you an order to teach in. So we start off with simple ones like unhappy, undo, right? And then we move up to more complex ones like add ly or er, teach, teacher, big, bigger, and we move up to much more more infrequent ones. So I would say spend a lot of time building vocabulary and really trying to enforce these. When your students are familiar with them, then I think when you know that you've been teaching the affixes and the derivatives, then you can think in word families. You know you can teach it because you know they've already learned the word family and the affix for it. However, some affixes are in each family, some of them are incredibly rare. So you have the word excuse. What about inexcusable? It's an extremely rare word. And so very often these things should be taught as a new lexical item. This is an extremely messy item. If you want to do a PhD on it, I would love to supervise you for this one. Okay, what activities can I teach students in form, meaning, and use? I think the use really should come from reading lots and lots of simplified text through graded readers, for example. The form and meaning you can pick up very quickly from some kind of an app or a word list. Very, very quickly, you can pick that up. The use is very difficult. You have to do the use from context. So make sure that you're teaching high frequency, useful words. As I said before, the New General Service word list project has lots of useful words for you to learn, for your students to learn. Please familiarize yourself with the list so that you know which are the frequent words, which words are worth teaching, which words are not worth teaching. Do we have any other questions?
So, Miss Hương, you feel certified? Any others? Or you have any questions for Professor Rob Waring?
Let me just look at the chat window.
Yeah, thank you. One response, one comment from Ramsmay. So he sent huge thanks to you and will follow your instructions on the documents.
Yes. So you want the file? Yes, I can give you the file right now. So just a moment. I will actually put it into the window in the conference website. There's a chat window, and I'll put it into there. So maybe that's the best place to put it. But I will also give it to you now. If you want to, you can download it right.
Yeah, you can put it on file here. So so
please download it right now. The recording, I think, will be available as well in the future. So please spend some time looking at that again. Now, I spoke quickly today. Lots of information today. If you're really interested in this area, please go over my lecture again slowly and carefully, thinking about what I said. I'm not expecting you to pick up everything here because guess what? There's a forgetting curve. You'll forget some of the things I've said. So go back over it, watch the video again, look at my slides, and ask me questions if you can find, if you have any, please
Yeah.
contact me. Now, I do plan to be in Vietnam next year for 2 to 3 months. So I hope to meet some of you in person. Particularly, I'll be spending my time at Vinh University in Hanoi and possibly Ho Chi Minh. So I look forward to maybe meeting and maybe collaborating with some of you in the future. And now tomorrow morning, I have a talk on how to do extensive reading with no money and no resources.
Thank you, Rob.
Really great, Rob. So if no questions for Professor Rob Waring, so on behalf of Week 2021, so we warmly thank you, all of you, and wish you all the best for the rest of the conventions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you are interested in learning more about vocabulary, the key name is Paul Nation. Find books by Paul Nation. He's the guy to look up and learn about vocabulary. He's got great ideas. There's a question here about please plan to Cambodia. Cambodia is also on my list, so is Laos. But I will be probably based in Thailand from next year. I'm actually leaving my university and I'll be moving down to Southeast Asia, but pretty much permanently from next April. So I'll see you a lot more in the future.
So you moved from Japan to Southeast Asia?